Since all people are born more or less equal, ancient biographers like Plutarch regularly created special origins and extraordinary circumstances for the great people whose lives they narrated. The anonymous author, traditionally remembered as Matthew, was, in this regard, a lot like Plutarch, although it is a tremendously complicated issue. Biblical scholars agree that the evangelist similarly embellished and almost certainly created stories about the birth of Jesus, the Galilean folk healer and nothing person who was put to death presumably for claiming to be king of the Judeans. The story of the Magi, found nowhere else in the New Testament, illustrates the plausible mixture of fact with literary creativity. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, look, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is this newborn king of the Judeans? We saw his star at its rising, and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word, that I too may go and do him homage." After their audience with the king, they set out, and look, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them, until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. Let's consider the Magi in the East. The Greek word magoi in this story has been translated in modern times as wise men, but that's too generic. Kings, simply incorrect. And astrologers, much closer than wise men or kings, but still only partially correct. Astrologers is only partly correct because ancient astrologers were not like the modern Western people who call themselves by that name. So, calling the Magi or Magoi astrologers becomes confusing because of modern connotations. The New American Bible Revised Edition rightly renders the word Magoi into Magi. In the cultural world of Jesus, Magi were a caste of very high-ranking political religious advisors to the rulers of the Median and then the Persian empires, roughly equivalent to the modern countries of Iran and Iraq. The ancient writers Strabo and Xenophon point out that in Persia, Magi communicated with the high god Ahura Mazda on behalf of the great king, or as they called him, the King of Kings. The fact that at one point Magi successfully revolted against and replaced the Persian king indicates that they were also an ever-present internal threat for Persia. History notes that Magi also resisted the imperialistic designs of Philip the Macedonian and Alexander the Great to conquer the ancient Near Eastern people. Hellenistic peoples viewed the Persians as decadent and weak. The Persians obviously resented that. Indeed, Persian prophecies, similar to Daniel's vision of the four kingdoms, each more decadent than the preceding Babylonian, Median, Persian, and Hellenistic, yearned for a restoration of true Persian kingship. When the Romans began to dominate the world scene, the Magi increased their support for Eastern Persian kingship and encouraged resistance against Western Roman imperialism. in the year 66 Common Era, while putting down the Judean revolt in Jerusalem, the Romans agreed to accept the Parthian candidate Tiridates as legitimate king of Armenia, rather than appoint a puppet king like Herod and his sons in Israel. Tiridates took the sons of 3 neighboring Parthian rulers and an entourage including Magi, relatives, servants, 3,000 horsemen, and numerous Romans, and made an all-expenses-paid-by-the-Romans 9-month pilgrimage to bend the knee to and accept the crown from Emperor Nero at Rome. Well, you can imagine that historical event was burned into the memories of everyone in the first-century Mediterranean world. Clearly, the Magi had enormous influence as advisors to Eastern kings. The anonymous author we call Matthew, writing sometime over 2 decades following this lavish pilgrimage, was undoubtedly familiar with the story. Like he did when he repurposed and spun out a new take on an old Moses story with his account of the slaughter of the innocents, and the flight into Egypt, Matthew again repurposed and retold a famous story, the one about the pilgrimage from the east with the Magi. But instead of Nero or Tiridates being king of kings, that role went to peasant infant Jesus. So let's consider Matthew's Magi. In the hypothetically recreated original story of the Magi and Jesus, the Magi chart Jesus' horoscope, discover and follow his star, a comet really, find and worship him, and leave. How did Matthew reshape this historical event to fit into the birth story of Jesus? Drawing inspiration from the Tiridates story, Matthew puts a very appropriate political spin on Jesus' story. Known for their centuries-old opposition to Western, currently Roman, imperialism, the Eastern Magi travel to submit to Jesus, a new Eastern king of the Judeans. The Magi proclaim a message that resounds beyond the confines of Israel to the entire ancient Near East. Here, in this peasant baby, is the new King of Kings. Here begins the restoration of true Eastern kingship. Man, that Roman boot-licking, murderous, and tyrannical puppet king, Herod the Great, had every reason to squirm and pee his pants. To add insult to Herod's injury, the Gospel story interprets the visit of the Magi as saying that liberation from foreign domination and restored Eastern kingship has come not from the elite, but rather from the poor and humble in a peasant hamlet, Bethlehem, of a rather insignificant principality, Judea. Later evolved Christian tradition and liturgy have overlaid the Matthean visit of the Magi, Jesus' Epiphany, with engaging symbolism and rich interpretations. We do well to remember that at the heart of this story, as in all the stories of the Bible, lies plain history, real politics, and human effort viewed through an ever-changing assortment of lenses.
you.